I let him help me. That was my first mistake. The office had already emptied out, one goodbye at a time, until it was just the two of us and the sound of the building pretending to still be alive. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The printer hummed in its sleep. My desk was littered with half-empty coffee cups and sticky notes curling at the edges, like they'd given up hours ago. He stood behind me while I stared at the presentation on my screen, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for a confession. "You're almost there," he said quietly. Not encouraging. Not rushed. Just present. I rolled my shoulders, trying to ease the tightness that had settled there days ago. "I've been staring at this slide for 20 minutes, I admitted. My voice sounded thinner than I expected. He leaned in to point at the chart, his arm brushing the back of my chair. That was all it took. A small thing. Accidental. Except my body reacted before my loyalty did. Heat climbing up my neck. A sharp awareness of how close he was standing. I told myself it was exhaustion. Deadlines. Too much caffeine. Anything but what it actually was. "Here," he said, reaching past me, his fingers hovering near the mouse. "If you reword this line, it'll land harder." His sleeve grazed my wrist. A spark, quick and unwelcome, shot through me. I didn't pull away. I didn't look at him either. I focused on the screen like it could save me. But then he paused. The room felt smaller. Quieter. I turned my head just slightly, not enough to be obvious, and our eyes met. Just for a second. Maybe less. But something in his expression shifted. Not hunger. Not confidence. Recognition. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in months. Not at home. Not in my own reflection. He straightened, clearing his throat. "Sorry," he said, stepping back half a step. "Didn't mean to crowd you." "You're fine," I replied too quickly. That's the dangerous thing about help. Feels like care. When he reached out to gently brush a loose strand of hair away from my face, slow, tentative, as if giving me time to stop him, I stayed perfectly still. And in that stillness, something inside me quietly crossed a line. He pulled his hand back like he'd touched a flame, then pretended nothing happened by focusing on the screen. "So," he said, too casual, "your opener. You bury the best line." I swallowed and nodded, even though my throat felt suddenly too tight. The air smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Somewhere down the hall, a motion sensor clicked and a light flickered on, then off again like the building itself was eavesdropping. "Okay," I managed. I scooted my chair a few inches to the side, giving him room. Or giving myself distance. I couldn't tell which. He dragged a second chair over, the legs scraping softly against the carpet tiles. He sat beside me, close enough that our knees almost aligned but not quite. The gap between us was small and carefully maintained, like a rule we were both silently agreeing to. "What's the goal?" he asked, tapping the edge of my notebook with the end of his pen. "You want them to approve the budget or fall in love with the idea?" I let out a tired laugh that sounded more like a breath. "Both." "There it is," he said, smiling, and the warmth in that single expression hit me harder than it should have. I glanced at the time on my phone, 9:46 p.m. And the lock screen photo flashed for a second before I could put it away. Me and my husband smiling at a beach I barely remembered enjoying. Sunlight, arms around each other, an old version of us that felt like it belonged to someone else. I felt my stomach tighten. Guilt arriving like a delayed storm. "You should have gone home," I said to him, trying to sound practical. "You don't have to stay." He leaned back, spinning the pen between his fingers. "You looked like you were about to throw your laptop out the window." "I was considering it," I admitted. His gaze dipped to my hands on the keyboard. "He doesn't like when you're here this late, does he?" The question wasn't nosy. It was accurate. Like he'd noticed the way I always silenced my phone during the last hour. Like he'd seen the little flinch that happened whenever it lit up. I kept my eyes on the slide. "It's not that he doesn't like it," I lied, clicking to the next page. "He just worries." Emichim. He didn't push. He just nodded once like he understood the shape of the truth even if I wouldn't say it out loud. My phone buzzed again against the desk. I didn't flip it over this time. I didn't have to. I already knew. "You coming home?" The words weren't angry. That almost made it worse. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then placed the phone face down beside the coffee cup with my lipstick stain on the rim. The stain looked like evidence. He watched me do it. Not judging. Not smiling. 5 minutes, he said softly, gesturing at the slide deck. We'll fix the flow. Then you can go. I nodded, but my pulse didn't slow. Because even as he said then you can go, his knee shifted slightly, and for a heartbeat it brushed mine, barely there, almost accidental. Except my skin reacted like it had been waiting for permission. We worked in silence for a while, the kind that feels louder than conversation. His pen clicked softly as he marked notes on a printout. My fingers moved across the keyboard, but I kept missing keys, my focus splintered by the awareness of him beside me. Every shift of his weight registered. Every breath. Pause there, he said, leaning in again, slower this time. This slide, let it breathe. His shoulder brushed mine. Not enough to be obvious. Too much to ignore. I nodded, but I didn't move right away. The screen glowed blue and white, reflecting faintly in the window behind us. Outside, the city was dark, distant, like the rest of the world had already gone to bed without us. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. Another lie. Just tired. He studied me for a moment. Not my face exactly, my posture, the way I was holding myself like I was bracing for something. His voice softened. You don't have to push this hard, you know? Something in my chest tightened. I shrugged. Someone has to. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the coffee cup nearest to him, grimaced, and slid it away from the keyboard. This one's been dead for hours. I smiled faintly. Like me. That made him look at me. Really look this time. The pen stilled in his hand. That's not true. The certainty in his voice unsettled me more than doubt would have. I turned in my chair, meaning to brush it off, but the movement brought us face to face. Too close, knees touching now, unavoidable. Neither of us moved back. I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the crease between his brows that only appeared when he was concentrating, or concerned. His gaze flicked to my mouth, then back to my eyes like he caught himself doing it. My heart thudded, loud enough I was sure he could hear it. This isn't a good idea, I said quietly, though I wasn't sure what this meant yet. He exhaled slow. I know. But his hand didn't leave the edge of my desk, and mine didn't move away from his knee. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Heavy, waiting. The hum of the lights seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of our breathing, slightly out of sync. I should finish this alone, I whispered. He nodded again, but his eyes stayed on mine. Okay. Neither of us stood. Seconds passed. Or minutes. Time felt unreliable. When he finally shifted, it wasn't away from me. It was closer, just enough that his arm brushed my back, his warmth pressing through the thin fabric of my blouse. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. Just one. And in that brief darkness, I felt the full weight of what I was about to lose, and how badly I wanted to lose it. I opened my eyes and found him still there, closer now, like my silence had answered a question he hadn't dared to ask out loud. I'm not trying to make this harder, he said softly. A laugh escaped me, thin and unsteady. You already did. He shifted back just enough to give me space, which somehow made everything worse. The distance felt deliberate, respectful, and unbearably tempting. The clock on my monitor ticked over to 10:03 p.m. The building made a low settling sound like it was exhaling. Somewhere far below us, an elevator chimed and went quiet again. Say the word, he murmured, and I'll walk away. I looked at the screen, at the slide we'd been revising for the last half hour, at the neat bullet points that suddenly felt meaningless compared to the chaos humming under my skin. I thought about my phone still face down, about the drive home I'd make, the polite conversation, the space between bodies that used to feel like comfort and now just felt like absence. I didn't say the word. Instead, I reached for the mouse, my fingers brushing his again. This time, neither of us pretended it was an accident. His breath caught. Just slightly. Okay, he said like he was grounding himself. Let's finish this slide. But his hand stayed where it was, warm against mine, thumb barely moving. Just enough to let me know he was aware of every inch of contact between us. I felt my pulse everywhere. In my wrists. My throat. The place where my body leaned toward him without permission. We worked technically. I clicked. He suggested changes. But every sentence felt layered with something unsaid. Every pause stretched too long. At one point I leaned forward to read a comment he'd typed, and my hair fell across my face again. I was aware of it, but I didn't move to fix it. Neither did he. He just watched it happen, his jaw tightening slightly like restraint was a physical effort. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "You're doing that thing." I frowned. "What thing?" "Pretending you don't know exactly what's happening." I sat back slowly, meeting his eyes. The honesty there undid me more than flirtation ever could. "Then stop me," I said. Not challenging. Just tired. Just true. He lifted his hand, hesitated inches from my cheek, giving me time. Time I didn't use. When his fingers finally tucked my hair behind my ear, the touch was gentle, almost reverent. My breath shuddered out of me loud in the quiet room. And when I leaned into his hand just slightly, I felt the last fragile excuse fall apart. The moment lingered longer than it should have. His hand at my cheek. My body tilted toward it like it had been waiting for that exact permission. He didn't rush. That was the most dangerous part. "You don't have to," he said quietly, though his thumb traced a small unconscious arc near my ear. Not a caress. Not nothing. "I know," I whispered. But I didn't pull away. The silence between us thickened, heavy with everything we weren't saying. The hum of the lights returned, louder now, like the room was reminding us where we were. An office. After hours. Two people who knew better. His hand finally dropped, slow and deliberate, leaving a phantom warmth on my skin. I felt the loss of it like a physical ache. "We should take a break," he said. "Get some air." I nodded, standing a little too quickly. The chair rolled back an inch, bumping softly into his knee. I steadied myself on the desk, palms flat against the cool surface, breathing through the sudden rush of dizziness. He watched me with an expression I couldn't read, part concern, part restraint. I grabbed my phone, finally turning it over. No new messages. That somehow made it worse. I slipped it into my bag without unlocking it, like I didn't trust myself with whatever was waiting on the other side of the screen. "Stairs?" he asked, already reaching for his jacket. The elevator felt like too much. Too enclosed. Too obvious. "Yeah," I said. The stairwell was dim. Concrete walls painted a tired gray. Our footsteps echoed as we descended one flight and stopped at the landing, the heavy door clicking shut behind us. The quiet there was different. Private. Charged. He leaned against the railing, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "About stopping." I crossed my arms, more to keep myself together than for warmth. So did I. We stood there, a careful distance apart. The city lights filtered in through the narrow window, casting fractured shadows across his face. "I haven't felt like this in a long time," I admitted before I could stop myself. His eyes lifted to mine. "Me neither." That confession hung between us, fragile and exposed. When he stepped closer, it wasn't sudden. It was measured. Slow enough that I could have moved away at any point. I didn't. His presence filled the space in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him without touching. My breath hitched, betraying me. He lifted his hand again, stopping just short of my waist. "Tell me to stop," he said one last time. Instead, I closed the distance myself, just a fraction, but enough. Enough to change everything. The first contact was barely there. A breath. A shift. The quiet decision of two bodies no longer pretending distance meant safety. My chest brushed his, and I felt the tension in him immediately, like he'd been holding himself back with sheer will. His hands hovered at my sides, unsure, asking without words. I nodded once. That was all it took. He exhaled, slow and unsteady, and his hands settled at my waist, not pulling, not claiming, just grounding. The stairwell felt suddenly too small, the air warmer, thicker. Every sound echoed. My breath, his, the faint rush of traffic outside the narrow window. "This changes things," he murmured, forehead resting lightly against mine. "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "I can feel it." Our noses brushed, close enough that the pause itself became unbearable. When our lips finally met, it wasn't desperate. It was careful, like we were learning a language we already understood too well. The contact sent a quiet shock through me, spreading outward, down my arms, into my spine, everywhere I'd been numb for far too long. I felt his hands tighten slightly at my waist, like he was bracing himself. My fingers curled into the front of his jacket, anchoring myself as guilt and longing collided inside my chest. The kiss deepened just enough to make my knees soften. I leaned into him and he caught me without comment, one hand sliding to my lower back, steady and protective. For a moment there was nothing else. No office. No ring on my finger. No drive home waiting. Just this heat breath, the quiet unraveling of restraint. Then a distant sound cut through it. A door somewhere above us. Footsteps. Reality tapping us on the shoulder. He pulled back first, resting his forehead against mine again, eyes closed. "We should stop," he whispered like it hurt to say it. I nodded, even as my body protested the space returning between us. We stood there, inches apart, catching our breath. And I knew deep in my bones that stopping now didn't mean going back. We didn't say anything on the way back up the stairs. The door opened with a soft click, and the office lights felt harsher than before, like they were watching us now. He walked a step behind me this time. Careful. Controlled. The space between us was intentional and fragile. I sat back down at my desk, smoothing my skirt like I needed the reminder of where I was. He returned to the other chair, not as close as before. The presentation waited on the screen, unchanged, patient. "Okay," he said quietly. "Last pass." I nodded, though my hand shook when I reached for the mouse. We worked again. Actually worked. Sentences tightened. Slides flowed. But everything was different. Every glance carried weight. Every pause hummed with what we'd already crossed and what we were pretending we hadn't. At one point he pushed his chair back and stood. "I'll grab water," he said. An escape disguised as practicality. "Good idea," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. While he was gone, I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. My cheeks were flushed. My lips slightly swollen. I barely recognized myself. Not guilty, not reckless. Awake. My phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up. Still up? Another pause. Then I'm worried. I typed "almost done" and erased it. Typed "I'll explain later" and erased that too. Instead, I locked the screen and set the phone face down once more. He returned with 2 bottles, placing one on my desk without comment. Our fingers brushed again, brief, restrained, but the look we shared said everything. We finished at 10:41. "I'll send it to you," he said, packing his bag. "In case you want to review it tomorrow." "Thank you," I said. "For the help. For the restraint. For not pretending nothing had happened." At the elevators we stood side by side, not touching. When the doors opened he hesitated. "This doesn't end tonight," he said softly, not a question. I met his eyes, my heart aching in a way that felt dangerously like hope. "No," I admitted. "It doesn't." The doors slid closed between us. And the silence that followed was louder than any confession. I drove home with the radio off, the city lights streaking past my windshield like I was moving through someone else's life. My hand stayed tight on the wheel. My body still remembered his. Where his warmth had settled, how easily I'd fit there. The house was dark when I walked in. Quiet in the way that feels heavy, not peaceful. He was asleep already. One arm flung across my side of the bed, claiming space without knowing it. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the slow, familiar rhythm of his breathing. The man I'd promised myself to. The life I was supposed to want. I changed in the bathroom with the light low, catching my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked different. Brighter. Troubled. Like I'd woken something I didn't know how to put back to sleep. When I slid into bed, he shifted, murmured my name, and reached for me out of habit. His hand found my waist, warm and familiar, and I flinched before I could stop myself. "You okay?" he whispered, still half asleep. "Yeah," I said softly. The word landed wrong. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night in fragments. The stairwell. The pause before the kiss. The way stopping hadn't felt like an ending, just a delay. I knew nothing had technically happened. No lines that couldn't be explained away if I needed to. No proof. No witnesses. But something irreversible had shifted. Help had turned into closeness. Closeness into recognition. And recognition into a truth I could no longer ignore. I let him help me. And now I had to live with the quiet knowledge that I'd never felt more awake than I did when I almost lost everything.